Hello dear Mutoh reseller. Today I will talk you through a presentation about Mutoh's genuine RIP software. You are already a bit acquainted with it since we have been bundling it with our 1638 UR and UH Mark II printers since beginning of this year. But now we are ready to roll out the software for the broader public. Hence this presentation, and let's have a look. First of all, a bit of key features on the software. It has a very clean, straightforward yet powerful user interface. We were able to build it from scratch, so there is no old things that we need to keep taking along, so it gives you a very fresh look and feel. It allows simple workflows that you can define yourself up to your own preferences. And of course, it is ready to give you the best possible output results on many of our printers. There is a simple user interface, but this does not mean that the feature list is limited. The feature list, as we will see together in a few minutes, is quite impressive. And another nice thing is that if you have an existing workflow, customer has already chosen for a certain RIP software in the past, the VerteLith can be nicely put in between an existing RIP solution and the new printer that is being connected to the system. The software allows you for making your own profiles in every version that we ship. And last but not least, you will see that there is an impressive amount of features specifically for the Mutoh DTO printers. Good example there is the features for jig printing and automated layout, which we will see more in detail in a few minutes. Of course, the core of a RIP software is the RIP engine, and the RIP engine in our case is supplied by the company Harlequin. The RIP itself, of course, converts the images and the texts into the data for the printers, and the Harlequin RIP core has been used already for many years in all kinds of printing applications and environments, and it has an excellent reputation. It's not a dead product, it's continuously being developed further, and it's future-proof, and new file formats and new versions of file formats are being accommodated in the software as time goes on. One of the well-known virtues and advantages of the Harlequin RIP is that it will optimally support the computer hardware that you're using. We chose for a 60-bit version, and obviously it handles PDF, STIFs, JPEG, PS, EPS data. Specific attention requires the 2.0 PDF for fast and perfect handling of transparencies, which is not obvious. Some of VerteLith's top features. There are a number of screenings available, but one of which is the Mutoh Clear Tone proprietary screening. Perfect handling of data with transparencies, as I mentioned, and two nice preview features. There is the soft screen preview, which obviously requires a calibrated monitor, but there is also RIP preview, which basically will visualize the actual printed dots before they are being printed, so that you don't need to ruin expensive media if there are elements in the print that you want to preview before the real job is launched. Then there is the complete jig workflow, which I will explain a bit more in detail, and the possibilities of it in the next slides, but a lot of it is based on being able to handle multi-page PDF data, which some of the customers prefer to use as a starting point. Also, it's possible to make do-it-yourself jigs if you have one-offs, or if, let's say, the customer does not want to outsource the production of jigs but does not have really a big cutting plotter to generate this. We have an elegant workflow that will allow you to do this directly on the DTO printer. And then there are a lot of possibilities for our UV printers, which require, of course, the layer printing in many different setups, also again with multi-page PDF. And if source data comes in that wants to use white and varnish, but there are no white or varnish layers, there are quite some possibilities to do this in an automated way and have the software generate the white and or the varnish layer based on the preferences you put in the software. As I mentioned, a big feature list, and no need to go now very much into detail, but you can see all the typical things that you know from a RIP are there. There is a nice dashboard. If there are multiple printers connected, that you have an overview of the printers that are connected and what is going on. Typical job definitions, the sizing, the rotation, mirroring, clipping, trimming, and so on are there. You can do, in terms of job finishing, quite a lot. There is step and repeat. You can do tiling. You can reprint certain tiles selectively. You can add crop marks or grommets, choking, bleeding, and adding print notes to the output. As mentioned, a lot of possibilities for working with jigs and defining jigs within the software. And also a lot of possibilities for multi-layer printing. Automated nesting, even with automatic rotation, is there. You can have white and varnish automatically generated. Obviously, also when there is white or varnish data, you can combine it with the image data the way you want. Integrated color management and the opportunity for you to create your own ICC profiles. Spot color replacement is there, and if you want, you can do some color adjustment or have specific ink controls done within a job. The software will allow you to see your print history and logs, what has been going on, and allow you to have access to some of the print statistics that are being kept. Also, ink and media are being monitored so that you can be informed of any shortages in function of the jobs to be printed. There is profiling opportunity, and as mentioned, if you have an existing RIP workflow at a certain customer, you're installing a new printer and the customer still wants to keep the existing workflow, but you want to give him the benefit of the extra features. In the VerteLith, a pass-through functionality is there, which means the RIP that is installed already will generate the data for the printer, and the VerteLith will do the extra work. We will see in a minute what this means. You can also export jobs and import jobs to interchange between different users, for example, and as mentioned earlier, it's a 64-bit RIP compatible with many data formats. First of all, when we, for example, make the comparison with the DTO printers, where we have been quite successful with the software that we included up until now, which was the Windows driver, the layer editor, and the layout tool. We had also the print server for the bigger printers. These softwares did quite well, but there were some, let's say, feedbacks from the market in the sense that, first of all, for example, color management was as it goes in Windows, which means you cannot create your own profiles, you don't have total color control. And another topic that is sometimes difficult or not so pleasing for the user is you have, of course, all these different software that you need to use, sometimes even combined with Adobe Illustrator. So it's more difficult with those software to create a streamlined workflow. And this is exactly what VerteLith is doing. It is bundling all software tools that we had in the past in a much more accessible and way and give you a nice overview. And it's adding the features that in the past were missing. Yeah? So it becomes a single software solution with integrated color management and, as I explained in the feature list, own profiles. The integrated print server is a nice feature if you go from the RIP in the past to the printer and you had high resolution data, many color panels. Sometimes there is what we called in the support area print hesitation, which means the printer is waiting for data to come in. This pre-handling of the data is being taken care of, in this case not with the print server, but in the print server which is now integrated in the VerteLith software. Proprietary halftoning, full-fledged preview, which is useful sometimes in giving support, but certainly also if you train the customer in specific cases, it can be very useful for the customer also. Auto-generating of the white and the varnish, and the jig workflow, which we can have a look at. Maybe first another word on the connection with non-Mutoh RIPs. So there is an existing workflow. I gave here the example with our other two software for the solvent printers, Onyx or FlexiSign, but basically any RIP that is on the market you will be able to combine. The data and the driver and all the setups will remain the same. The only difference is that rather than sending the data directly to the printer, it will go or it will be treated via the workstation which is running the VerteLith software. And this in reality means that it will be possible in the future to have an effect. Please note, we will not change the data of the RIP. Yeah? So any colors that you have and that you know and that the customer is familiar with will remain intact. We're not changing the amount of ink that is being fired. But we do have a bidirectional communication with the printer. So this means on media consumption, ink monitoring and so on, the monitoring and the communication between VerteLith and the printer will, let's say, be added into this workflow and will give you and the customer access to much more data in the future. And this is a starting point. It's not an end point. We plan to add many more features to this in the future. And if you have nice ideas about that, please feel free to communicate and ventilate those to us. A specific example, more orientated to the UR and UH machines, is, for example, the feature where you can combine more than just one layer of data with a finishing of white and varnish. In some cases, on the UV printers, printing on transparent media, you want to use different images, either to do a black backlight, either to do a backlight film where you have adapted data for night vision and for over daytime, or you want to make some kind of animation, or you want to use media double-sided, that there is a totally different image on the front and on the back. This software will allow you to do up to 4 layer printing, where on the front and the back side you do not need to use the same image. So this is shown here with image 1, image 2, with a white diffusion layer in between. And if it's really a totally different image, you can do a blocking layer, or you can make cutouts to make some animation possible. Then an example of a multi-page PDF. So this has to do with automated processing of multiple jobs, and make sure that you have as less RIP operations as possible. Multiple jobs, same way of treatment and printing. Okay, you have this multi-page document consisting of all the different jobs that you want to print, and they will be printed one after the other using all the same settings. And the same workflow can be combined with the jig layout feature. So imagine the job on top here, multi-page PDF, and you want to process it on an object printer, which in the environment of the print environment you created, you said, okay, this is going to be distributed over a jig. Then you see each job will end up in a different jig position. Talking about jigs, I mentioned sometimes indeed you have bigger runs and objects which you use a lot. In that case, the user will most likely have prepared a jig which he's using quite often, but it's also possible that the user has no easy access to somebody that can help manufacturing a jig, or he has no access to equipment to make jigs himself, or he has some series of jobs which vary but which require a jig to make easy positioning. In all of those situations you can use a reference board onto which, first of all, in the software you'll define the jig that you will be using with the different objects, and then using the varnish and multi-layer you can print, of course, with some distance around it, some margin, so that you can nicely position the objects and use that jig then in combination with the jig definition to make the outputs. That's what we call 2.5D printing using varnish. There's also an advanced jig layout feature, so it's not always just the data, but a very good example there is a smartphone cover, where usually on the smartphone you have cutouts, cutout for the lenses, cutout for the flash area, and when the data for this is defined in scalable vector graphics, then you can import this and use that as your jig layout and then define the areas. This is an example where we combine everything. So here you have the original rectangle, and then the left one have the rectangle with the cutout area where there will be no printing. And if it's not a perfect rectangle but you want to follow the corners of the design, in this case the smartphone cover, you can combine it all together, define the layout and define the non-print zones in the design. Multi-layer printing. In this case, what we are doing, we're having color data. Again, this is for a DTO printer, color data, but you want to finish this image with a white underlay because it's, for example, a non-white object, and you want some finishing with gloss varnish. In case it's not in the original design, the varnish and the white can be what we call auto-generated. There are a number of settings there that you can choose how this is being generated. And then again, this can be combined with what I explained before. You have a jig layout and it's distributed over the jig in multiple copies. Same thing again, but in this case it's a multi-page PDF, but there is varnish data. Well, in that case, the multi-page PDF can be set up that you will take the CMYK data and put on top of that in another layer the varnish data, in this case for the lips of the lady, and distribute it over multiple copies in the jig. Another example, multi-layer printing and automated layout. So we have now not a multi-page PDF, we just have different jobs, different files, but which are together one job. Again, the lady and the lips for the varnish, two separate files, and you set up, okay, these two need to go together and be distributed on a jig. And the combination of all of it is that you have multi-layer PDFs and you have multiple ones of those. Each one is a multi-page, so it means you have the data for the CMYK and the varnish, and another job again, CMYK and varnish, and you want multiple copies of the first one and the second one, and those also are automatically distributed. So you see plenty of combinations that you can make upon what the customer prefers and how their source data normally comes to them, maybe via third party, separate files, combined files, plenty of options, which does not mean you need to use all of them, but in the end, customer will probably select a workflow that is convenient for him. possibilities for print logging, a history of jobs, and in case that there are multiple printers connected to one VerteLith setup. Imagine you bought multiple Mutoh printers, each of them is being combined with the VerteLith. Obviously you don't need to run them on separate workstations. You can add an extra license on an already existing setup, add the extra printer, and then in the dashboard you see two printers, and you will keep in this one version with multiple licenses the statistics of each of the printers separately. In terms of support, a customer making his installation will obviously become member of the Mutoh Club, and via the Mutoh Club connection they have access to an online chat service which will be multi-language, so mean they can ask their question or their practical problem via this chat service and be helped directly. Operating environment, there are obviously some minimum requirements in order to run the RIP comfortably. Also display resolution is defined in order to get the best possible results. This makes sense. There are drivers for most of our printers, also the older printers, so it's certainly feasible that if a customer is running today still the separate software and is maybe hesitating to move to another software or wants to streamline their setup or is adding a new DTO printer, and 461 so to say, together with the 426 from the past, likes the VerteLith software, those drivers are there. So value jets, we have the split up here with the different product lines. So the orange ones are all the UV printers as well as the UH, and in Mark II and the Mark I versions, the DTO printers, and then value jets 628 and the MP, the 54-inch machine, value jet 1638, 2638, and of course the new ExpertJet printers, and specifically then for sign and display also the value cutting plotters. So that's it for now. We will be back soon with more information because we will have available dealer copies of the software for you. We will call them dealer maintenance versions. For you to get acquainted with the software, have one with your technician, have one in the showroom to demonstrate the printer. So thank you for your attention, and should you have any further questions or ideas, please share them with us and get in touch with your Mutoh sales representative. Thank you again.